thinking better and thinking together about life's most important issues. A place to finally meet in the middle, to think freely and reasonably about the big questions of life. This is Thinker Sensitive. Welcome to another episode of Thinker Sensitive. My name is Ryan Ragazine, and I am your host. Hope you're having a good day and a good week. Here in Colorado, it actually snowed over the weekend, and so my hope is that will be the last snowstorm of the season, but you never know. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the notion of true kindness and the truly kind person. Without giving much away at all, in the new Batman film, a funny contrast is created between how the Batman is received by others and how Bruce Wayne is received by others. Of course, the contrast is humorous because they're the same person. In one scene in the movie, a police officer with the last name Martinez shows clear disdain towards Batman, treating him with contempt. In a later scene in the movie, we find Martinez, the same exact police officer, speaking highly of Bruce Wayne, professing his admiration for him. Martinez is kind to Bruce Wayne, but unkind to the Batman. But little does he know, Bruce Wayne is the Batman. Listen to what Jesus has to say in his famous Sermon on the Mount about selective kindness and selective love. If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. But love your enemies. Do good to them. And lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Then your reward will be great, and you will be children of the Most High, because He is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Be merciful, just as your Father in heaven is merciful. So we saw an interesting contrast between the way Batman is received and the way Bruce Wayne is received. And now we see an interesting contrast between the way police officer Martinez lived and the way Jesus lived. One embodying selective kindness and conditional love, and the other embodying universal kindness and unconditional love. In the excerpt I just read, Jesus is saying that the truly kind person is the one who is kind to all, not just to some people. And the truly loving person is the one who loves all, not just a few choice people. With all of our progression as a species, and in all of our advancements as a society, we still have not progressed to the point of comprehensive kindness and unconditional love. Jesus' words are just as relevant and applicable now as they were when he first spoke them. In fact, they might be more relevant now than ever. In today's episode, I want to offer a constructive critique of what can be called selective kindness, something that I believe is all too prominent in our culture, and something that I think we should strive to transcend and overcome. There are a lot of conditions that we place on kindness. And thus, there are a lot of reasons why we are good to some people and not good to others. One would be looks and physical appearance. Aren't most people nicer, kinder, and more considerate to those that they are attracted to than to those that they are not attracted to? It's kind of like the guy who laughs at all the pretty girls' jokes, whether they are funny or not. But when the girl's friend, who isn't as attractive, tells a joke, it's received with dead silence. Crickets. I think we see this a lot on social media. Accounts run by content creators who are really attractive tend to get more positive interaction and affirmation, whether they are producing high quality content or not. Whereas accounts run by those who are perceived as being less attractive are more likely to get ignored or passed by, even if the content they are producing is amazing. Social media accounts run by attractive people simply get more views, likes, follows, and subscriptions. This is simply the way the world works. But the truly kind person is just as kind and good to the person who is less attractive than the person who is absolutely stunning. We are also kind or unkind to people based on ideas, viewpoints, belief systems, and worldviews. This is obviously a huge one today. Without regurgitating all the things that I have said on this podcast about the unhealthy state of our society, which has become so polarized and divided on the basis of differences in opinion and viewpoints, I would just say that it has become all too common today to be good to those who agree with us and bad to those who don't. The right wing conservative is kind to fellow conservatives and unkind to liberals. The left wing liberal is considerate to fellow liberals, but inconsiderate to conservatives. Unfortunately, the same can be said about the religious and the non religious for the most part. This selectiveness also applies to notions of tolerance, sensitivity, patience, and grace. We tend to show and extend these things more liberally to those who are part of our tribes and camps, to our people. On the contrary, we are mostly intolerant, unsensitive, impatient, and ungracious to outsiders. Our ideological biases create favoritism, which materializes into selective kindness. But the truly kind and good person is just as considerate, tolerant, sensitive, patient, gracious, and good to political and religious outsiders as ideological insiders. People also have a tendency to be more kind to those who have similar interests than to those who don't. You see this a lot in high school. I don't know if it's still like this, but the athletes and jocks hang out with each other. The musicians, artists, and theater kids hang out with each other. The smart kids and nerds hang out with each other. And the popular kids hang out with each other. Watch any movie from the 80s or 90s or early 2000s, and you'll see this kind of thing. But adults fall into the same trappings. We tend to be nicer to people who are like us and who like the same things as us than people who aren't like us and don't like the same kinds of things. But the truly kind person is just as nice to the person who has similar interests than to the person who doesn't have similar interests. Selective kindness is also often based on popularity, wealth, and status. This one is pretty obvious and it's similar to our first condition. Most of us are more kind to people who are famous, successful, and carry a particular social status than to the average Joe, and certainly to the downtrodden and those who live on the margins of society. To illustrate this, you could imagine someone spotting a beloved celebrity in New York City. When the person sees the celebrity, he gets really excited and rushes over to get a better view and possibly a picture or an autograph. But as he runs towards the celebrity, he absolutely trucks a homeless person who is walking down the sidewalk and was apparently in the way. People tend to be more kind to those who are higher on the social or economic ladder than to those who aren't. But the truly good person isn't just good to the rich and famous, but to all. This reminds me of the parable of the Good Samaritan from the Gospels. To close this very brief, but I think very important and very timely episode, I want to read this parable and then briefly explain it. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." Let me explain the significance of this parable. The priest and the Levite are fellow Jews and respected members of the political and religious leadership of Jerusalem. They were models of holiness and righteousness within their communities, capstones of ethics and morality in their society. The Samaritans, on the other hand, were foreigners, foes, and enemies of the Jews, who possessed divergent political and religious beliefs, were viewed as impure, unrighteous, and unworthy, and were despised as scum because of it. So though this story is being told by a Jew to a Jewish audience, it's the hated Samaritan and not a fellow Jew who actually fulfills the Jewish law, the law of Moses, in the parable. Out of all people, the maligned Samaritan is the one who truly loves his neighbor as himself. See, the Samaritan's kindness and the Samaritan's love are not based on any conditions, whether cultural or political or religious or otherwise, but rather they are unconditional. For Jesus, this reflects the kindness and love of God, who is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked, does not show favoritism, and loves his enemies. I believe that the universal kindness and unconditional love of the Samaritan and the universal kindness and unconditional love of God is greater than the selective kindness and selective love of the world, even far greater. And I believe that striving to become a truly kind person, someone who is kind to all people, not just some people, and striving to become a truly loving person, someone who loves all and loves unconditionally, is not just personally beneficial, but beneficial for all. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time. This episode, and all episodes of Thinker Sensitive, are available on thinkersensitive.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and more. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app today to listen to more thought-provoking content from Thinker Sensitive.